Hi everyone, this is Yogesh, and today I bring with great pleasure the conversation that I had with Brian Kayfitz and Jonathan Sande. Brian and Jonathan are great developers, are passionate about mobile app development, and come up with a lot of experience in the field. Starting with Brian, Brian at present is an independent contractor who has around 10 years of experience in mobile app development. He has worked with startups as well as with big leading industry corporations. His work can be found in the domains like gaming, traveling, e commerce, and few more. He is also a co-author of the book Flutter Cookbook, and he really is very much interested and loves to stay up to date with the industry. The next we have in our guest list is Jonathan Sande. Jonathan on online community is also well known by the name Suraj. He is a Flutter developer and a former Android and iOS developer. He is a big fan of Flutter and has written a good amount of books in Dart and numerous tutorials describing how to develop application in Flutter and application and app development in general. I hope you enjoy the conversation that I had with them. I definitely had enjoyed talking to them for sure. That's it.
Like we always do. Jonathan is starting his day, so just will try to understand how Jonathan plans to go with the day and how are things going on in general in his current programming life. And that same question then goes to Brian. So we'll start with Jonathan and then it's Brian's turn. Now for Brian, it will be possibly how the day has been and how he is planning to make his weekdays going on. Okay, weekend because it's a weekend thing. So yeah, starting with Jonathan, please, Jonathan.
Yeah, first, thank you for having me here. We've been trying to get together for a long time, so glad it's finally worked out.
Yeah.
I don't love doing interviews, but you kept encouraging me to, so it's good. Thanks for that invitation. And what your question was?
Yeah, how are you planning to go with the day, and how is the weekdays in general for you? So how's the development life right now?
So I'm here in Mongolia, and I'm studying the Mongolian language in the mornings, and I do some programming work in the afternoons. So that's a typical day for me.
Okay. Brian, over to you.
Every day is different. I don't necessarily know what each day will have been told until I get to see it. So I just wake up, walk the dog, drink way too much coffee, probably an unhealthy amount of coffee, and then just go through emails and Slack messages that have been accruing through various clients and see what happened overnight and where I need to catch up to. And basically, probably what I should be doing every day is actually beginning by writing a to-do list on a physical piece of paper, not on Trello or Asana or any of these tools, just paper, and getting everything kind of all the tasks figured out for the day and how that intercuts with multiple clients and family and just and trying to find time for learning and growing, and then before you know it, the day is done.
Okay, got it. So let's start with this part itself, the organizing part. So let's say when it comes to developers in general, it depends on what project they are working on and what kind of thing they are working on. But one thing we can definitely agree in general is generally projects are bigger. It's not something you can finish in weeks. Sometimes it take months, possibly, and they since they are so big, it is very, very important for us to organize how to go with the process, maybe from ideation phase, building phase, deploying phase, checking if things are working right or wrong. Why do you think, first of all, in your, in both of your understanding, how much is organizing things from start matters? And then what kind of best practices in your, again, perspectives, can anyone incorporate who is facing issues in organizing maybe the projects and development part in general? So let's start with Brian.
You started with the easy questions. So it's powerfully subjective now to basically come to realize, and you probably need to look at the people that you're working with, or if you're just working with yourself, be introspective or talk to yourself, preferably not in a crowded room. That would be weird. But find the right way that everyone likes to work. Like some people like to use the Jiras and all the project management tools. They're all basically the same. You can just pick whatever brand you want. And some people prefer Excel. Some people don't like to use any of that, and almost kind of view programming a bit like sculpting in a way, where you're kind of like discovering it as you're going along and just always refactor and reform. So definitely project management and having things organized can help you, but they can also be a crutch if you take them too far. And going micro on your tasks can actually slow you down quite a bit. So I like having like the big picture stuff written down, and you just keep that in mind. But if you need to kind of like go down to like the feature or even smaller than that, like I don't need a Jira ticket to say that this button needs to be blue, for example. Like that's probably too much. Like you can just say, hey, Jonathan, make the button blue. Okay, cool. Let's go. That level of meta is probably excessive. So really the most important tool, I guess, is actually just talking to your team members and figuring out how you work best. And don't be married to any of these tools. Like feel free to change or do whatever. Like I found, honestly, the best tool, as I joked about earlier, is paper. And just the simple act of just writing down what you need to do on paper and doing it every day and crossing it off is enough to kind of get it attached in your memory and know what I can actually write down my to-do list, and then I never need to look at it again because I wrote it down. If I punch it into a project management system and then close the window and go somewhere else, it's like, it's gone. It's ephemeral. I don't really see it anymore. Paper is always next to me, except if my dog or child steals it and decides to draw tractors all over it. But that's another story. But yeah, it's just listen to the people that you work with and find common ground.
Got it. Thanks for the perspective, Brian. Jonathan, over to you. What's your perspective on this?
I feel like I'm not a good person to ask about like team stuff because generally I've done most of my development on my own. I think when I started writing for, when I was writing for RayWonderlic.com, and still, I think that's been my biggest experience, like working with a team to whether produce an article or produce a book. And for listeners who didn't know, like Brian was the head over all the Flutter stuff. And also he was on my team for writing the Dart Apprentice book. And so just working with other people, it taught me a lot of value in working with teams, just because often if I'm working by myself, I'll just go with whatever I think is best. But then when you're on a team, people point out, hey, this isn't so great, or what if you did this a little better? And so that actually improved my articles, improved the book. And so that was a big learning experience for me.
Okay.
For programming, like making apps, also I've done that just mostly on my own. But in the last year or so, I've had some experience working on a team, and that's been a lot of trial and error. One example is like I had a like an audio control thing on GitHub, and so I just was making it myself. But then someone wanted to contribute, and he was saying all these good ideas, so I let him just contribute a whole bunch of code. But then I had misunderstood his whole intent, and so he had written all this code, and then at the very end, I was like, "Oh, that's not exactly what I wanted for it," and I felt really bad because I was going to have all this code, and I feel like if I had known better about how to work on a team, we could have figured out exactly what he's talking about a little bit better. So that's definitely still an area I'm growing in.
Okay, so coming to the team part and management part in general, unlike Brian and more like Jonathan, I have been a person who has been, even I can say I have been working in teams, but it has been for me that the team synchronicity has not been good. It's not that I'm not doing very well here, but right now, but I had situations wherein maybe I'm running fast, I'm moving fast, and they are not moving fast, or similar situations like this. So mostly what has happened with me is, even if I'm in team or if I'm alone, either way is same. I work with them, but I'm the person who kind of stays alone in doing things. So it's less like teamwork, it's more like alone work or freelancing work. But I have been trying my ways to find out how to work with the team. I with working at Ray Vanderlick, or working at my own startup, or even in past when I was managing my own clubs in colleges and all, and working with friends in general. So what I have seen is a transition from me working with teams, which I was not able to do well, and sufficiently. I'll say it's not that I was not able to contribute enough, but it's a feeling. It's a way how you get your ideas in sync with the team, how you get and decide how to get the work done in team, things like that, which matters a lot. Like, so going on that stage, things, learning those aspects myself. But I'll say Brian is because Brian has been working into teams multiple times in past, so he has much more experience than Jonathan and me. So yeah. So yeah. So yeah,
Every
Brian,
team
do
is
you want to
different.
say?
Yeah, every team is different though. Like the experience you have working in, like I worked in like a giant enterprise team of 40,000 employees spread around multiple buildings and all across the country, and how the bureaucracy and the politics that come out naturally from that, it makes writing code almost a political action, which is very strange. Or you worked in very small startups where everyone is trying to work as fast as possible before they run out of money, which creates a different kind of environment. Or more established medium businesses where it's not like, it's basically like, yeah, come down to, there is no golden answer to say this is how you build software. It's always different at every stage, and you just have to be willing to listen and be flexible. And if you are got like that enterprise employee mindset where you're just like one very small piece in that team of 40,000 plus people, then you just like wait for your requirements to come down with these big, thick waterfall type environments. You just do your little thing and then pass it down the pipe. That's not going to fly at a startup. You can't think like that. So it's just,
yeah,
always be open to learning and sharing and being okay that the only constant in the world is change.
Yeah, these are two nice points to look into when you are working in a team. Apart from it, one more thing that I have realized while working in teams in general, and this is just my limited understanding of teamwork, and let me know what your opinion, what both of your opinions are on this part, is you don't have to follow a specific procedure always. What you really need to look into is what your team is saying, what is the requirement of the hour. Sometimes what happens is we are too much into organization that even, let's say, like Brian mentioned, if he has to make a change in the button, change it from maybe brown to blue, putting up a Trello card and things like that is not required. So it's in common understanding in the team. It's a flexible way of working, that this is how we should follow, rather than this is how we actually follow, things like that. So it's project dependent, it's team dependent, it's situation dependent. You don't try to constrain yourself that you need to follow this way. You rather try to be very open and free on whatever way you have to go forward in team to make the work done rightly. So that's
flexible on the team. One thing I've appreciated about working at Rip Wunderlich and now Codeco is just I don't know if every team's like this, but the teams I've been on, like how flexible people have been. Like sometimes I'll say, well, this isn't quite according to guidelines, but what if we do it a little bit different? And a lot of times they'll say, yeah, go for it. Or sometimes they'll say, well, actually, there's more information you didn't know. And so, oh, okay. So I've just appreciated the flexibility of my teams that I've been on, but I can't speak to, again, I don't have a lot of experience on teams, but I do like flexibility.
Yeah, got it. So yeah, Brian, if you want to add anything.
I was just
quickly
kind of thinking that like, regardless of any of this like meta content around the actual product, the only real source of truth is the code. And you can write whatever you want and say like, oh, the button should do this, you should have this types of styles, and you can have all like the best laid plans of mice and men all together, but if it's not in the code, it doesn't matter. And that's kind of what I've almost kind of like felt like we should be, if you are going to write documentation, if you are going to actually spend time on that, it should be using tools like DartDoc or whatever the equivalent is in other languages, or JavaDoc, and just have your kind of instructions almost in the code base. So when you don't have to go off to some Confluence page that no one looks at, that talks about versions of the software that's 10 versions old and is completely not relevant at all to what it actually is, the current state of the product. So it's really really easy for the project management stuff and even like extra documentation stuff to just get out of sync with the code. And then it really becomes a hindrance to actually, like, you could try to be onboarding a new developer, and they're trying to learn how to set up your environment or whatever, and there's like do these 10 steps, and none of them work because, well, they're not the right steps anymore. Mm-hmm. I've been on situations like that where the documentation was wrong, and that can be challenging. And I know when I set up projects, so like I'll pick on the environment setup because everyone has to deal with that. Mm-hmm. If you can just clone your repo and then just hit run, so I'll just say, I'll pick on Flutter. So I'll say, if I just do Flutter run and that's it, I don't have to do anything else. That's awesome. That's how it should be, like minimal. If I have to go through like 5 build runner steps, and then I have to make sure to compile my protobufs, and then I have to run this esoteric make script that someone has put together that then needs to go through the Bazel build engine. Like, I could just keep listing jargon forever. But that becomes a huge hindrance to people actually getting work done. So follow just like standard community practices of how things work, and don't get the project kind of caught up in all these extra tools and rambling on.
Got it. And I think that's a nice way to put it, how to get things done. At least the best I'm able to imagine right now. So yeah, moving on further, let's now dive deep. Let's now dive into the Flutter part in general, because that is the part we have been missing, and that is the part we have most common in. So we'll start with this question, and maybe starting with Jonathan this time. How do you see Flutter in long run, Jonathan? And what is your opinion about Flutter in general? How Flutter is able to do in this cross-platform domain as compared to other frameworks?
I foresee it in the next few years still continuing to grow. It's definitely, it's definitely saved me a lot of time as I've taken it, like adopted it, and just kind of abandoned native Android and iOS, because I no longer have to write two apps. I can write one and then just deploy it to both platforms. Then all of a sudden, when Flutter started supporting web, all of a sudden I was a web developer. I'm not a web developer, but all of a sudden I became one. And so not much trouble just to take some Android or iOS app and just all of a sudden convert it to a web app. So that's nice. Also, just during testing, I haven't made any desktop apps yet, like published any, but I use desktop during publishing just to run the app, because it starts up so much quicker than the emulator or simulator does. So
agreed.
I love that Flutter supports all these platforms with the same code base.
Okay. So Brian, before me saying anything, please, over to you.
No, I just echo that. Flutter's great. It's my go-to tool these days for any new project or when talking to clients. Like, I don't even suggest native anymore, which is, if me from 5 years ago heard me say that, they would be like, what is wrong with you, man? Native iOS for life. Everything else is garbage. Flutter's changed everything. It's just made mobile development and now web development and desktop development, and who knows, maybe AR, VR in the future. Everything just that much easier. Like, even I've been looking into game development in Flutter with using Flame, which is something that would seem crazy a couple years ago. Like, no, you have to use a Unity to do everything. And like, well, maybe not. So maybe Flutter will slowly eat the world, which I'm not going to complain about, because Flutter's great. But again, like, if there's a massive paradigm shift, like let's say Meta comes out with this AR headset that actually takes off, and the $1 billion investment that Zuckerberg is sinking money into actually takes off, and now we all got to switch to AR. Maybe Flutter's not compatible with that, because it's not really designed for 3D. So that might be, we'll have to learn and grow. So like, when teaching people, I like to try to focus still on the fundamentals, learn clean code, learn object-oriented design. Don't be married to a programming language. Don't be married to a framework. Be willing to learn and grow and change.
Okay, got the perspective. Sharing my perspective on this part, what I'll say is I like Flutter for multiple reasons. And this comes from the fact, again, the same part is how efficiently and platform is able to provide you this cross-platform thing, which is what we are discussing right now. So looking at it from two perspectives, from an individual perspective as well as from product perspective. From product perspective, if you can have, like Jonathan tries to echo the word a lot, if you can have a same code base wherein you can work onto your projects, whichever they are, maybe application, like for instance on the desktop or application on the smartphone, and web part, it's way easier and convenient to keep and synchronous and sync of all the code base. It's way easier to work and do the things in a right manner. For a product company, it implies they can work quickly and get things deployed, focus more into building stuff rather than focusing more into the tech stuff. That's how I see things in general. From a personal opinion, if I have to say, it's like I have been trying to figure out what kind of tool can I have which can work all the way around. Like, for instance, if I want to implement a native functionality easily, that is, of course, will I be able to do that? Like, for instance, we were discussing right now about Unity and Flame. So one interesting thing that has happened in past, and I'm sure you guys know about the part, is that someone out there integrated Unity in Flutter. So it's like, if you want to integrate something which is like very much native type, you can definitely do with Flutter. It's not that you are being constrained of by trying things out. And see, if you really want an idea to perpetuate, you should be able to try things fast, because the only way to know if an idea will work or not is when you try it out. It might work, it might not work, but the only way to know is when you try it out. So Flutter enables that fast way of doing things. And second aspect that I like about Flutter is this cross-platform thing. Like you guys know about Fuchsia, okay? Fuchsia is an OS project which Google has been working on. It has this microkernel zirconium, if I'm pronouncing it right, which is what it is. It has the capacity to work from embedded systems to normal systems like laptops, smartphones, and all. So the kind of possibility I see here is this: you possibly can bring in same maybe code base which can work on embedded systems, to which even Flutter is doing right now, or trying to do at least right now. Maybe not too much mature on that side. We can do things on embedded system, from embedded system to our normal typical systems. Now, what this enables is, in like Brian mentioned, the best thing you can do is you can just write Flutter create and Flutter run. That's the only thing you need to do. So provide an abstraction, because we don't want to deal right now when we are working on a project on the nitty-gritties of how, let's say, stacks work, registers work. We want to do development part in general. So we want some sort of abstraction, so we can focus on only the things which are required for us to do. So now what happens in the scenario which I mentioned is, if you have if you have a single code base, or if you have some tool through which you can deploy things on multiple locations, what you can do is you can make the possibility of integration quicker. What I mean to say is, you have an idea, and like future will be sort of IoT plus some software, something like that, or and strong combination of hardware plus software. That is how I'm able to envision. So having some tool like Fuchsia, Zirconium, and on which Flutter can work on, and you can provide applications and all. Having a solution, a software like this will enable you to deploy things quicker, and will make you more, you can say, innovative in that term. That is how I'm able to see Flutter right now. That is what my conclusion is. Yeah, before moving on to the next set of discussed topics, let me know if you have any different opinions than what I mentioned, and in the terms that I mentioned, or do you feel differently than what I feel in things, if you have anything.
I don't remember hearing anything that I disagreed with.
Okay.
Brian? Preaching to the choir here, man.
Sorry, I wasn't able to understand that part.
So you're preaching to the choir. It's, okay. We are, all three of us are probably huge Flutter evangelists. We need to get some web developers on the call who might have a contrary opinion, who thinks that JavaScript should eat the world. So, and they're probably right. Likely, yeah.
Got it. So let's continue with that part. Dart right now. What is both of your opinions regarding Dart as a language as compared to any other language which we have, like a native language, Kotlin, Swift, or Java, Object-C, and JavaScript as well? How do you see Dart, and what are the advantages of Dart, and what are the possible disadvantages of Dart? Starting with Jonathan.
For languages that I have experience with would be Java and Swift, recently anyway. So Kotlin, I never learned much. Mm-hmm. Compared to Java, I like Dart. I like null safe Dart. So I always got tons of null errors in Java. So it's nice to have some null safety with Dart. Compared to Swift, I feel like Dart is a lot more succinct in a lot of the syntax than Swift was. For example, let me try and, maybe for both of them, like doing asynchronous tasks or background tasks. I guess even Dart with background tasks isn't super simple, but just asynchronous tasks in general, the async await is pretty nice in Dart. With what was it in Swift? In Swift you have to, like if you have a null like an optional value. I think it was you have to do if, let, or guard, and it felt clumsy or difficult to me in Swift. But I like all the ways you can handle null values in Dart. I don't know if in the last couple of years if Swift has updated some of that, but I like how Dart does that. And to me, Dart just seems like, I mean, they call it sometimes a boring language just because the syntax is really just, I mean, if you know C syntax or if you know generally object-oriented programming, you can pick up Dart pretty quickly. There's some quirky things about Dart, but generally it's pretty fast to pick up, and that's by intention from what I understand. I like that.
Yeah, so let's discuss about the quirky things, because you do a lot of you have, in my understanding, done a lot of work in Dart, from low level binary stuff to the high level thing which normal programmers do. So what are those quirky stuffs, and what do you think, how can Dart be improved more than what it is right now?
Oh, when I say quirky, I don't mean necessarily bad. I just mean maybe a little bit different than other languages.
Yeah.
When I'm trying to think of it on the spot, I don't know that I can think of good examples. What's different? Well, Brian, help me out if you can think of some examples.
Probably when you go to get close to use a lot of reflection and generics and really try to push your object-oriented hat hard. That's kind of like even today I was playing around you can't subclass static elements right now. Mm-hmm. So you could so if you have an abstract class and you declare a static property on it, and then you're anticipating that your subclass that implements that abstract class will overwrite that static property, that's not available in Dart. Mm-hmm. You can't do that, and I think you can do that in other languages. I'm pretty sure you can do that in Swift and in Java. I'd have to check because it's been a while since I wrote either of those languages. But that's not the end of the world. To have somebody I think the benefits of Dart certainly outweigh any of the holes in it. The fact that how wonderful the development environment is, tools like Dart Format and Dart Analyze coming out of the box and just by default being fantastic. Like very little configuration is required. Actually, in Dart Format, there's deliberately no configuration options. You just use it, and it's just everyone's code should be looking consistent because it's a very opinionated way of formatting code. This whole battle of where do I place my brackets is over. Just use the tool, and it will decide for you. What I love the most about Dart is just how easy it was to learn. Like I almost as a thought experiment want to show some Dart code to a Java developer who has never written Dart before a day in their life and see if they can understand it. I'm pretty sure they will be able to read it. It's I love calling it a boring language because it's not surprising. It's obvious. It follows a lot of the same history of C level languages. So if you follow the C to C++, Objective-C, Java, and somewhat JavaScript, they're all in continuity with each other. So if you have opinions on the decisions that were made by C and you massively disagree with them, and you're more of a Lisp person, for example, then you probably won't like Dart very much. But that's a different paradigm. This follows with the standard, just get stuff done. It's a very workman-like language. It's not trying to be fancy. It's not trying to surprise you with these crazy new ideas. And it's a language that knows very much what it wants to be. It wants to make apps. It wants to make websites. It wants to stay at the application stack. You're never going to use Dart to write an operating system. Mm-hmm. You're never going to use Dart to write, I don't know, blockchain or something that's massively system intensive. There are other tools for that, If you need to drop down to Rust, that's what Rust is great at. Rust can write an operating system. Actually, recently Rust got into the Linux kernel, which is awesome. But I always kind of felt like Java, in a sense, could never pick a lane. Like it wanted to be this like really high level, easy to use application business programming language, but the standard library way of importing a file is just like, first you got to open up your input stream and then parse each bit. Like it's just it was at some level a very high level language of all the garbage collection and everything there, but then also it couldn't shed the low level semantics that it needs. Dart does not have threads by intention. There's a lot of keywords and concepts that Dart has deliberately removed from other languages, like even like the access control list in Dart, public and private, and that's it. And maybe you need more, maybe you probably don't. And just it's the perfect language for just getting something done quickly. Is it the most efficient, the most powerful language in the world? No, but for the most part, it's more than you need.
Okay, my opinions on this, and this is just an abstraction. This is just taking some points that you mentioned. I'm not going to go too much into my opinion, but yeah. One thing that we kind of always agree and acknowledge is Dart is a boring language, which I think is a good thing. There are few things in life which needs to be boring. Boring implies you don't, it's not hard for you to work with them. Sometimes it's not what matters is something boring or not. What really matters is how much useful and productive it can be for you. If something can deliver that and it is easy for you to use, that only matters. Again, there is let's say user experience sort of things wherein user, like if we are discussing in terms of application part, people feel good when they have a good application in their hand. Developers feel good when they have the right tools in their hand. So if Dart can be that good tool through which, let's say, we write the code, we can write the code, and we are able to do pretty much everything what we require. That's the best thing we can hope for, and with very less. So, like we discussed about this, we even had this discussion. I had this discussion with Brian. When we put a lot of things into something, it gets very complicated and it gets very unstable as well. And this is Brian's word, which I'll agree with. So that's one way to put it. So in that way, what I mean to say is boring is great if there are things which needs to stay boring, and that is how we will be able to work. We'll be able to work on something which is really meaningful to us if that boring thing is able to deliver that part. So yeah, that's my general call on this. Coming to this part, like we discussed about Rust, Dart does not have threading thing. We don't have multiple threads in Dart. We have then Rust. Rust is something like, let me know if I'm right. Rust is something similar to CPP. The only difference it makes is it has a garbage collector. So you are not. You are not. It is not that you might be accessing data's reference points in a wrong manner. You're not afraid of pointers in general. I believe that is what I mean to say. What is your opinion on this? And second aspect is, now we have new language out there. Maybe it's a congratulation, at least interesting thing for me. It might be not a very good thing. The Carbon language. How do you see? What is your opinion about Carbon in general and garbage collection? What kind of impact it has made for Dart and in general in programming languages?
Go ahead, Brian. I have no experience with either of these languages, so
okay.
I can't speak to
my experience with Rust is very limited at this point. Like I have mostly just watching it from afar and going, wow, this is beautiful. I wish I had a project where I could use this, but I don't. So I do need to correct you slightly that there is no garbage collector in Rust.
Okay, my mistake.
That's okay. There's so much things that are going on. They use a system called the borrow checker, which is more of like a compile time thing, similar to kind of similar to Arc in Swift Objective-C, but much better. And anyways, I'm probably going to get a lot of stuff wrong here because I'm not a Rust developer at all. But it is. There's some like truly fascinating things that I've seen that you can do with this kind of slightly more advanced model of memory management. Like Rust can actually figure out if you get an array out of bounds error at compile time as opposed to runtime. Like it actually and that's like one of the most common errors that people like doing. There's like a joke that there's only there's only one real problem in programming, and that's naming things in off by one errors. But so Rust tries to solve that. But also Rust is very much like a competitor to C, and to a degree C++, probably more likely C. And it's so when you need power, when you need raw metal, and you don't want to use a programming language that's going to melt your hardware, that's actually the choice. In terms of Carbon, I don't really have an opinion on that one. I've never used Carbon.
I understand that part.
Yeah. Carbon seems kind of like one of those very Google style technologies where there's probably a lot more going on inside the Googleplex than they want to expose outside. So they're kind of like, yeah, we're looking on this thing. And then they said like, yeah, but don't really use it yet. It's not really production ready. It's probably more to solve their problem of how they deal with all this C++ code that they have in their systems that no one wants, and how clunky of a language C++ has become, and people are trying to move away. So you see like languages like Carbon, languages like Rust that they're not competing with Dart. They're competing with C++. And then you have languages like Go, that another Google language that kind of sits in the middle, where it's not quite C++ level performance, but it's faster than Dart. So it's kind of halfway in between. Basically, like it's good to almost become like a polyglot at the end of the day. Dart is great for many, many, many things, but there are things it is not great for, and know the right tool for the right job.
Yeah. So we are developers. We tend to develop more application things like that. So Dart does a good job. Maybe not Rust, at least from the development perspective. So yeah.
It's just there tends to be like a tribalism in development communities that I always find kind of fascinating. How people associate themselves like, I am a Rust developer. Like you pick, I'm a Dart developer. This is my team that I belong to, and screw everyone else who's not on my team. And it's kind of bizarre to that point. Like it really shouldn't. It really doesn't like make that much sense. Like if you're just like raw, it's the programming language is a tool. You don't have people running around going, I'm a screwdriver, and screw the people who use hammers. Not important. If every problem is a screwdriver like that, it doesn't make sense. But I never quite understood why, like us as humans, we attach ourselves to these tribes, and then put walls around ourselves so that we don't want to engage with what's going on outside the Dart community, or even maybe outside the Flutter community, and not worrying about what's happening on the server side Dart with Aqueduct.
Yeah, sure. That's something which we need to look into. That is a perspective we need to look generally into. It's like you should not be too much involved or absorbed into something specific. You are in something, you are doing great. Try to look at the outside world, have a bigger picture, understand everyone is a part of the bigger system. If you are able to understand that, you will be able to cooperate, work, get more efficiencies and things done rightly. So that's, yeah. Jonathan, do you have anything to add to what Brian said, or anything you want to comment about what Brian said, or anything you want to discuss about this part in general?
I thought, like, like Go, yeah, Go being a faster language than Dart, and it's probably a better language for servers. I'm almost sure it is. But from my perspective as a individual developer making both server side and the app side, like even if Dart isn't the fastest language on the server, I still like it better because I don't have to switch my thinking from front end to back end. Like what I write on the front end, and the same syntax works on the back end. And just that alone is more important to me than a little bit of extra speed that a better language might be on the server. So as far as
what I feel ideally it should be is we should focus on the thing we are working on. Well, we definitely have some sort of this is better for this purpose, this is better for this purpose, and that is a practical thing. We need to understand this part. But ideally, what in my understanding, that is ideally what has to happen is we need to like we have a language, and we should be able to do our stuff. That is, let's say that is the idealist scenario I can consider for myself. I have one language in place and I'm able to get my things done, which is not obviously realistic. But from a developer perspective, if I want to build something, it helps me a lot. Like if I have to work on the backend part, front end part, so it really helps a lot. So that's pretty much right. That's something what you can expect out there. But okay, that's something which might not always happen. So coming on with that part, what is like, because you have worked a lot in Dart for the backend part. What is your opinion about Dart for the backend in general, and what do you see how it is progressing right now? Jonathan, over to you.
I'm certainly not any expert on backend in Dart. I've just done some. I still have a production server running Aqueduct now, that because Aqueduct is no longer being updated, I'm just running what version of Dart, some really old version of Dart that's still clunking away, but it's working. But I have to rewrite the whole back end just to take Aqueduct out, which kind of taught me a lesson about relying on third-party packages. Like, because I was basing my whole back end on Aqueduct. When Aqueduct stopped, it's like, oh no. So that kind of brought me back to, let's rely on something a little bit more stable than maybe another company or maybe an individual developer. And so if, like in the future, if I continue with backend on Dart, I would probably look at Shelf, or maybe is it Frog? What's the new backend package by Very Good Ventures? Anyway, they're a pretty stable company, so I would trust probably using them. But Shelf is developed by the Dart team itself, so it's even though it's maybe a little more low level than some of the others, I would probably look at trying that out.
Okay, got the perspective. So what do you still? What is your general understanding about Dart? Because there is still some work going on, in my understanding, on the backend side. Okay, but on the backend side, what I mean is Dart being a language to be used as a backend thing. So what is your, you can say, sort of feeling? How will Dart go on the backend part?
You'll probably
feeling
want
is
to
the
ask
right word. Yeah.
Questions, because like for me, I'm an amateur programmer that I needed a backend and I didn't want to spend a ton of money for something. So I need just buy a cheap server and get something running. And I didn't want to learn a whole new language just to make the backend. So I took a language I already knew and just got something to work. And so it's what I've done is nothing complex or super hard. So as far as where it's going and what the best options are, Brian will be your better guy to ask for that one.
For me, I guess it's almost more of a marketing problem than a technology problem. Okay. Like you can say like, okay, Aqueduct gets the job done. You might actually want, there's a fork of Aqueduct called Conduit. That updates the most recent version of Dart, so you get null safety, but they probably broke a bunch of APIs along the way. So I don't know if it'll be a brutal experience updating it. But it was kind of like, so in the history of Dart kind of originally started off as a web language. Like it was supposed to be another language that ran alongside JavaScript. So you had Dart running in Chrome, and that would end up kind of forking the web, where people kind of write Dart websites as opposed to JavaScript websites. And there was not the greatest response to that. So for a long time, like Dart just kind of like floundered, or at least floundered externally. Inside Google, it was still used quite heavily, but outside, not so much. And it took Flutter to come around to kind of give Dart second wind. And I remember when Flutter was first kind of announced, there was a lot of people pushing back against Dart. Like, yeah, this Flutter thing sounds cool, but why did you use Dart? That's so weird. Why not Kotlin? Why not JavaScript? And the Flutter team there's quite a few articles about like justifying their use of Dart as to why it was the right language to choose. So when it comes to like server-side Dart, there's no like Flutter on the back end. And then by when I say Flutter, I mean like a marketing huge project with a big team and big money behind it that would draw people to use it. Like there's a lot of smaller projects. So you have your aqueducts, your shelves, your all these like every other day on the Dart subreddit, I see like, oh, I have this new experimental app server that I just built in Dart, and then the next day you see another one. So it doesn't really inspire confidence as to which one you're going to go into, because these are just like one-man projects, and if that person gets busy or moves on to something else, or it's just doesn't the support just isn't really there. So I'm almost thinking like when Node came out and JavaScript was no longer bound to the website, and you have a legion of web developers who've been writing JavaScript for years and years now have this access to take the language that they already knew, but be able to reach a much further audience. Like that became like a fulcrum for JavaScript to just explode. Now Dart has seen a meteoric rise with Flutter, that's for sure, but they have not penetrated the server yet. Maybe they never will. Maybe they don't need to. Maybe Flutter's enough. Sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah. So as it stands right now, like if you really want something stable for, I would probably say something like Spring Boot. Might be a better option. It's a more established, also fairly boring framework, or use Go or even Node if that's your preference. But it seems like it's going to be hard to find a server-side Dart program that's going to be around for the long run.
What do you feel in general and programmers should know about the aspects which are very, very necessary for a person to do a right programming? What kind of approach he or she should take, the kind of learning curve they should follow in general? We'll start with Brian, then we'll go with Jonathan.
Kind of learning curve. You need to know your design patterns even more than your algorithms, though algorithms are important too. Know your data structures and maybe know your history as well. I found like history is the best teacher. If you can see how languages evolved and understand how people came to certain decisions, that might make your decisions a bit more nuanced and a bit more informed. There's a lot of kind of Ouroboros-like behavior. The Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. where we really go in cycles in development. You see like patterns going around, and because we're not maintaining our history, like there was a while where people were saying strong types are terrible, like the pushback against Java. Let's go loose types. We want JavaScript. We want Python. We want PHP. We don't want this strong typing business nonsense. Well, now TypeScript is here, and people are like, "Oh wait, no, dynamic typing is not a great idea. Maybe strong types were right the first place." And I'm bet in 5 years we're going to do it again. It's
cyclic process.
It's very secular and very short-term memory. So I would encourage people to you have the standard advice of learn your foundation, but also learn your history, and that might help us from even like Winston Churchill said, like those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. I'm probably paraphrasing, but the same applies to anything. So simply knowing how the Dart has had a very storied history before Flutter came around to rescue it might make your approach a bit better, and even understanding why certain decisions, like why does every function by default return dynamic as opposed to void, even though void probably makes more sense because of JavaScript. But yeah.
Got it. Jonathan, over to you.
I think one thing I recommend when people are just beginning learning programming and want a learning path is to just make something. I taught programming for a couple college classes, and I found that even computer major students, like when they graduate, they still really can't program very well, and they haven't made any apps. Maybe they've gotten some theory, maybe not, but yeah, they haven't really made anything. In my own experience, like it's when I try to make something and then realize, oh, I don't know what to do, and have to research, and I do something and it works, but then maybe I get some sort of code review or someone makes fun of me on Stack Overflow or something I posted, and then I realize, oh, actually, I shouldn't be doing one long switch statement with 100 different choices. Maybe I should replace that with something better. And so just through that, I've had to learn more design patterns or learn better data structures. And so, yeah, I mean, my general advice to new programmers is to just make something, make it work, and then gradually increase that. And yeah, those data structures and super important patterns. Just add them as you need them.